my name is Amanda Foody, and I am the author of the Wilderlore series. The first book, The Accidental Apprentice, releases on March 30th from McElderry Books at Simon & Schuster. Wilderlore takes place in a fantastical world that is full of magical, dangerous creatures called beasts, as well as people called lore keepers who bond with the beasts in order to share their magic. However, the hero of this story, whose name is Barkley Thorne, is not one of those super cool lore keepers. Barkley didn't grow up with beasts. In fact, his town is terrified of them, especially the beasts who live in the nearby forest they call the woods. Going inside the woods is deeply forbidden, and Barkley would never break the rules on purpose. But one day, while out performing his duties as a mushroom farmer, Barkley accidentally strays inside, spurring a magical adventure that Barkley never wanted any part of. So I'm going to read a little bit from chapter 1. So, Wilderlore chapter 1. Barkley Thorne knew almost all there was to know about mushrooms, and there was a lot to know. He knew the poisonous ones never grew on trees. He knew the red ones with white spots made warts bubble up between toes, but the white ones with red spots cured warts, welts, and pustules of all kinds. He knew which ones made you drowsy or loopy, or could even knock you right dead if you weren't careful. "You're supposed to be taking notes," Barkley hissed at Selby. Both boys were apprentices to their town's highly esteemed mushroom farmer, but because Barkley was older and smarter, he was the one in charge, and he took his position very seriously. "I can't walk and write at the same time," Selby blubbered, clutching his quill with his whole fist. Selby was a very pink boy. He had a pink nose and pink cheeks, like plucked chicken, a resemblance made all the worse by his buzzed blonde hair and stocky frame. In nearly all ways, Barkley was the opposite. Though 3 years older, he was so short and skinny that Selby would likely outgrow him before next spring. His dark eyes looked like ink smudges on his papery white skin, and his shoulder-length black hair was combed harshly to both sides, slick with oil to make it lie flat. He didn't see what was so hard about writing and walking. He doubted it was harder than reading and walking, and Barkley rarely walked anywhere without an open book in his hand. The two apprentices had been assigned an extremely important mission to find a rare mushroom called the Morning-Tide Moral, and for this they adventured to the edge of the woods. The woods was no average wood. It was so large that no map could fit all of it, so dangerous that no adventurer dared explore it. It loomed to the west of their town like a great shadow. The trees along the edge were gray and spooky, their trunks twisted like they'd been wrung out, and their branches reached up like claws toward the overcast sky. It was quiet except for the rustle of decayed leaves and the snaps and cracks of brittle twigs beneath boots. This was the only time to find the Morning-Tide Moral, that bleak in-between part of the year after the leaves had all fallen, but before the first snow. Selby stumbled over a tree root and bumped into Barkley's back. "It would be easier to write and walk if you weren't always looking over your shoulder," Barkley grumbled. "But we're so close. You know what Master Pilsman says about, we haven't gone in, and the town is right there." Barkley pointed behind them to Dulshire. Their small town crouched on a knobby hill, encircled by a stone wall covered in spears like a giant thorn bush. The people were about as friendly as thorn bushes as well. They didn't like laziness. Naps were expressly forbidden. They hated visitors. Visitors could mean tax collectors, circus performers, or worse, lore keepers. The only things the people of Dulshire loved were rules, but they only had one rule about the woods. Never, ever, ever stray inside, because the woods would trick you if you let it, leading you too deep within to find your way out. And deeper in the woods lurked the beasts. But Barkley, being a dutiful apprentice, would never dream of breaking Dulshire's most important rule, especially because of how often he got in trouble for accidentally breaking so many little ones. He would do exactly what he'd come here to do, and that was to find the Morning-Tide Moral, with or without Selby's help. Barkley didn't understand why Master Pilsman had insisted Selby come along, or why he'd even taken on a second apprentice in the first place. Dulshire didn't need 2 mushroom farmers, and when Master Pilsman retired, it would be Barkley, not Selby, who took over for him. After all, Barkley made sure he was the perfect apprentice. He took detailed notes in neat, cursive handwriting. He'd memorized every mushroom species in the Philosopher's Field Guide to Finding Fungi, volumes 1 through 9. Even Master Pillsman himself had claimed that Barkley was the hardest working boy Dulshire had ever seen, which was why Barkley refused to leave the mission empty-handed. He needed to prove to Master Pillsman that he only needed one apprentice. "I'm not leaving, not yet," Barkley declared, and he continued marching along the tree line. Selby followed, but whimpered as they walked. As the older apprentice, it was Barkley's responsibility to comfort Selby, not just to teach him. Selby had never been near the woods before, and even Barkley, as experienced as he was, still thought the twisted trees looked a little bit frightening. But Barkley found it very hard to be nice to Selby. At home, Selby had many brothers and sisters who cared about him, parents who looked after him, a room of his own. Barkley had none of those things. He'd had the last one, at least, until Master Pillsman had let Selby move in. There was no orphanage in Dulshire. If you wanted supper and a bed for the night, then you had to work for it. So Barkley had grown up working many jobs. He'd stacked books in the library, recorded new rules for the lawmakers, and delivered more spears to the sentries. But even though Barkley had tried to be exceptional at everything, when it came time to choose his apprenticeship, no one in Dulshire had offered him a spot. They were too worried about the futures of their own children to care about a scrappy, rule-breaking orphan, too. And so Barkley had knocked on old Master Pillsman's door and begged for this apprenticeship, a job no one else wanted. Master Pillsman had refused and refused and refused, but Barkley kept trying until he agreed. And had been fine for 2 years, all until the day that Selby showed up. He still cried and fled back home every chance he got, but Master Pillsman hadn't refused him, not once. "It'll be dark soon," Selby whined to Barkley. "Not for hours," Barkley told him. "It's freezing. It's winter. What did you expect?" "I'm hungry." "Why didn't you eat lunch?" "I fed it to Gustav." Gustav was Master Pillsman's pet pig, who sniffed out valuable truffles hidden in the ground. Normally, Gustav would join the boys on quests such as these, but Gustav had mysteriously gained weight these past few months, so much weight that waddling exhausted him. He spent all day napping by the fire. "You've been feeding Gustav?" Barkley buried his face in his hands. The mystery of the pig fattening was solved, and once again, all of Barkley's problems proved to be Selby's fault. "I don't like mushrooms," Selby complained. "They're slimy, and they taste like dirt." Barkley could hardly believe what he was hearing. "Then why are you here?" he shouted. It was the very question that had bothered him for months. He also felt personally offended. He liked mushrooms very much. Selby's pink face flushed several shades pinker, and he burst into tears. "My mom said it was a good future for me." This seemed a lot of pressure to put on an 8-year-old, and for a moment, Barkley did feel rather bad. But Barkley couldn't get distracted. If he wanted to keep his apprenticeship, he didn't have time to feel sorry for anyone but himself. This job was the only thing that ensured Barkley really fit into Dulshire, and Dulshire, however small and rural and rule-obsessed, was Barkley's home, and he would never leave it. When Barkley had been very small, before his parents had died, he used to dream of adventure. He spent hours imagining the world that existed beyond Dulshire's prickly walls, other towns and cities and kingdoms and far-flung realms beyond the woods. But his parents had loved Dulshire. They wouldn't want such a life of uncertainty and danger for their only child, and so Barkley refused to disrespect their wishes. He tried to forget about the call of adventure, concentrating instead on how to stay, to belong. Barkley focused back on the mission, and for the next several minutes, the only sounds were Selby's teeth chattering, his nose sniffling, or his stomach rumbling. As Barkley knelt to examine a promising fungus, Selby tapped him on the shoulder. "Look, look." Barkley swatted him away and pulled out his forager's notebook to compare the sketch to the subject before him. He frowned. He needed a scarlet dome, but this one was clearly crimson. Mushroom foraging was a very precise science. He dug it out anyway and added it to his basket. "I've done it again," Barkley scolded himself, inspecting the dirt underneath his fingernails. Master Pillsman hated how dirty Barkley got himself, how his hair looked wild only hours after combing it. "Repeat after me," Master Pillsman would always say when he quoted Dulshire's law book. "Filth is prohibited. No dirt, no odor, no potty mouths. Cleanliness is orderliness." "Barkley!" Selby squeaked, and Barkley finally stood up and turned around. The grass between them and Dulshire was alive, with dozens, no, hundreds, of tiny glowing white eyes peering at them between the weeds. The piles of leaves beneath the boys' boots shuddered and shook as small figures dashed within them. Selby hopped back and forth as though he stood barefoot on hot coals. "Barkley!" he wailed. But Barkley was frozen, his gaze fixed on a single creature perched on a rock. It looked like a mouse, except without a tail, and with 6 curled spikes protruding from its back. Barkley had seen beasts before. Sometimes, on breezy autumn days, strong gusts of wind carried glowing insects from the woods to his town, whose stingers turned your skin swollen and green. He'd spotted beasts flying in V-shapes across the sky, seeking out warmer places for the winter, and leaving trails of glittery smoke behind them. Occasionally, more vicious beasts snuck out from the woods to break into chicken coops and goat pens for a nighttime feast. When Barkley was 4 years old, the legendary beast who lurked in the woods, named Gravaldor, had destroyed Dolshire on Midsummer's Day. Though Barkley had never glimpsed Gravaldor's face, he remembered how the town walls had crumbled from the force of his roar. Gravaldor had torn roofs off homes with his jaws, sinking fangs into stones as though they were butter. His magic had caused the earth to rupture, making whatever remained of their once flat town now stand on a tilt. It was thanks to Gravaldor that Barkley was an orphan. Knowledge of beasts had since been forbidden in Dolshire. Travelers who spoke of them were turned away from inns, in case they could be lore-keepers, wretched people who bonded with beasts and shared their magic. Children who played too close to the woods were punished. Even the beast-related books in the library were burned, making the entire subject a mystery. I thought beasts stayed in the woods," Selby moaned. "They usually do." Barkley had foraged along the edge of the woods before without ever spotting a beast. But midwinter was only a few weeks away, and like midsummer, the holiday was known to make beasts behave strangely. Barkley took a careful step away from the mouse-like creature. He considered reaching into his pocket for the charm he kept to ward off beasts, but it was already too late for that. "Don't panic," he told Selby. "They're blocking our way back to town, but if we just think of—" Except Selby didn't listen. Dropping his notebook and quill behind him, he turned around and shot off into the woods. So that's it for the excerpt today. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you pick up the book and really enjoy it. Thanks!